Who owns the narrative? War, perception, and power in a divided world.
Global Eyes.
Welcome to Global Eyes, the podcast where we explore shifting power, contested truths, and the people caught in between. I'm Waslat Hasrat Nazimi.
And I'm Shani Rosanes. Today, July 7th, we're coming to you from the Deutsche Welle Global Media Forum in Bonn for a conversation that feels more urgent than ever.
The war between Israel and Iran has shaken the region, but while missiles dominate the headlines, another battle is unfolding, the fight over narratives. Who owns them, who gets hurt, and who is silenced?
From Delhi to Beirut, from Berlin to Doha, perceptions of this very war that we're seeing unfolding are changing wildly. And the divide between Western and Global South responses to this war is growing deeper.
To unpack this, we're joined by two voices who understand the complexity behind the headlines. Barkha Dutt, the award-winning Indian journalist and founder of Mojo Story, with decades of experience reporting from conflict zones.
Also with us today is Mohamad Chreyteh. He is Deutsche Welle's own Bureau Chief of Beirut. Thank you for joining us, coming today. He's an experienced journalist and a digital producer with a lot of focus and knowledge of the Arab media world. And thank you for joining us today as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Barkha, let's start with you. While during the Iran-Israel war, much of the focus was on the escalation, and what was overlooked mostly was how differently this was viewed from different parts of the world. So in the West, in North America, or in Europe, it was mostly about national security, retaliance. But how were things looked at in the Global South, in India, for example?
Thank you for having me. It's a very interesting question because as globalized citizens, we're obviously aware of what's happening in the world, but how we react to that issue depends on where we come from and how our histories have been shaped, what our cultural ties are with nations, and so on. So, for example, in India, there has been a long, old, historic relationship with Iran. But at the same time, looking at it from India's interests, Israel has stood in solidarity with India against terrorism. We had a terror attack in Kashmir a few months ago, and Israel at that time had offered unequivocal solidarity with India. The reason I'm mentioning this is that India is, I would say, a kind of unique country, and I think many countries in the Global South are quite different from the West in this way, that they have historical and cultural ties tied to nations, but they're also balancing that with their own interests. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a sense in the Global South that the West is often very transactional. It will be guided by its own interests, and that's all right. But that increasingly our countries too have to be guided not by a set of abstract principles that nobody may in the end stand up for, but by our own interests. And I'll give you an example from really close to India, Afghanistan, right? And I talk about this because for years, Afghanistan was presented as a moral war because it came after 9/11. But then the way Afghanistan was simply abandoned and left back in the hands of the Taliban just shows to you that the moral principle on the basis of which that intervention happened, everybody forgot about it. Everybody forgot about the women of Afghanistan, leaving them there to fight their battles. And the reason that it's so important to remember Afghanistan is to reinforce the fact that foreign policy is not, unfortunately, driven by a set of universal principles. Each country reacts from their own national interest, and it's no different in India or in the Global South.
I absolutely agree, especially as an Afghan myself.
I know, and I would imagine, I can only imagine how you feel and how cynical you must feel to see what's happening to women there. And so much noise was made about defending the rights of the Afghan women, and the world has moved on and forgotten them.
To me, to be honest, it set the foundation for what's happening now in the past years, the downfall of the West, so to say, and their moral authority that they had.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, Mohamad, of course, Lebanon is directly connected to this conflict and hit by it. You know, where does it meet Lebanon? Is this also, when we're talking about the double standard of the West, it's probably also something that Lebanese are very much familiar with. What's your view from Beirut? How do you see the way the world looks at this?
Yeah, I think it's, for one reason, it plays into the narrative of the anti-Western narrative. Basically, people who maybe supports Iran or the global South, the East, to say that there was one example, like the way the U.S. Withdrew from Afghanistan, to say, well, look, this has been your allies forever, and then they will leave you in your hardest times, and then you should not rely on them, and it's their interests that drive their policies in the whole region, and not a set of standards and norms around. Yes, that gives them huge room to, maybe spread their own narratives, and sometimes use this to, maybe crackdown is a harsh word, but sometimes it is the case. I mean, to defy what they say are Western values and norms, whereas it's really, I mean, democracy, freedom of expression. It should be thought about and looked at as a global standard rather than Western standard.
If you like this episode, check out our playlist.
I just think that's so interesting. You see, there was this idea of the world as the West being more enlightened and having the values that the rest of the world had to catch up with. And I think it is the end of American exceptionalism. America saw itself as the arbiter of these values and how it was going to teach other countries democratic values and human rights and principles of free speech. And I think we are seeing one by one, especially in the age of Trump, but even before Trump, but especially in the age of Trump, many of these principles, these ideas, these institutions simply collapsing. But the truth is that any government anywhere in the world will be navigating multiple things when they decide which side of a debate they're going to be on. And the first and foremost duty that any government owes their people in any country is what protects the people of that country. That is the job of the government. So I think to pretend that we're all in this sort of equal world and we can all equally take the same set of choices, firstly, the world is not a level playing field.
Yeah,
right? If you take climate change, for example, look at the sort of disparity in so-called developed nations telling the rest of the world, okay, now you change your economic policy while everybody's done what they want to. Nuclear weapons.
But I want to stay on this in a minute, because I wonder how it's seen, for example, in Lebanon, the fact that, because India is not just another country. India sees itself as the leader of the global South, of the sort of non-aligned group of countries, and it wants to take a leadership position in that way, in that capacity. And I wonder, when looking from the Arab world, looking from Lebanon, is there expectation? I mean, of course, America is a huge topic for itself, but when you're looking at other places, looking for other allies, like in Asia, like in India, is there any expectation from India? Is there a disappointment from the stand that India has taken so far? Is it even a topic? I mean, how big of an issue is that? Not
really. I mean, you could sense that. If we get the example of the latest Indian Pakistani conflict. So people were worried not only in Lebanon, in the Middle East. Like you could sense this on social media, just because they are both nuclear powers, and people were really sharing thoughts that this might be the end of the world and of the region, maybe if it develops. So in that sense, yes. And then that developed a narrative. So because people want to take side, yeah. So who do we stand with? And then that developed another narrative that, well, let's say we're with Pakistan because it's a Muslim country. That's on one hand, and on the other hand, because Modi has been, openly saying that he is a friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's where the audience is really open about. No, we want to stand with Pakistan. We don't want this conflict, but if it happens, we want to stand with Pakistan.
Can I come in on that?
Yeah, because I would really like to hear.
Sure.
What do you think? Do you think that this indicates that there is a global shift in sympathy and alignment, or?
Oh, not at all. And this is so interesting because I have a completely different perspective from what Mohamad just expressed, and I don't know if he's speaking for people in Lebanon, but I will speak. For India, not that India is such a big country, I can't speak for all Indians, but I will speak as much as possible to my understanding of my own country. including the fact that there are, millions of Indian Muslims who I'm pretty sure would share my opinion about what I'm just going to say. I think most Indians may have a view on Gaza and Netanyahu, but that doesn't shape our view on how we saw what happened recently, where Indians across political parties, so it isn't just a Modi thing, and it's very important for your audience to understand that, there were cross-party delegations that went out across to the world, including here to Germany, to show that India stood united in its battle against terrorism. So when this terror attack took place in Kashmir, to say that it doesn't matter what an Indian's view is, we may have very many different views on what's happening, what Netanyahu is doing. On this issue, as Indians, I would say there might be 1% that may vary, but I would say 99% of Indians feel the same way. So Netanyahu, Gaza, Israel is not the point in this narrative.
Yeah,
to
but that
Indians.
didn't matter to people in the Middle East.
Sorry?
Because that didn't matter to
No,
people in the
since
Middle
you
East.
mentioned it,
Yeah,
I said
exactly.
that, since you mentioned it, you said maybe there's a kind of, looking at Pakistan through the lens of a Muslim world,
Yeah.
or looking at it through the lens of, is India getting closer to Israel? And I'm saying there could be more than one opinion on that issue within India also. Political parties do fight amongst themselves on this issue. But it's not a top of the mind issue. For India, the top of the mind issue is what happens to Indians. See, every country is concerned. Lebanon will be concerned with the security of the people of Lebanon more than the people of India. India will be concerned with the security of the people of India. So borders aren't irrelevant. Borders are very relevant. Our histories are very relevant. Our realities are very relevant to how we see the same issue through a different lens, through how it impacts us.
Well, it's interesting you're bringing up the history, because I think one of the things we need to bring in mind when we talk about the coverage, or when we talk about the Middle East, the way it's being seen and reported on in the West versus the rest of the world, there's the historic baggage. I think definitely when it comes to Germany, when it comes to Israel, there's this special connection in history. Definitely when it comes to Britain or the US, these are all clear, kind of baggages that are coming with this. But then at the same time, a place like India is maybe free of that baggage. Or and I wonder, the way you see it, what's the West when bringing in this historic baggage into the discussion? What is it missing? What is it losing? What's, is it a baggage? Is it,
Yeah, I mean, well, I understand because of my involvement in my kind of profession, I maybe understand the background of Western narrative and Western media towards the conflict in the Middle East. But that's not how people in the Middle East sees it, because they are, first of all, because they are affected firsthand, and second, because they sometimes see double standards in coverage when it comes to conflict in the Middle East versus conflict in Ukraine and Russia, for example. And there's a consensus, there's a general feeling that the West, mainly the Western media, is shaping this conflict or nuancing towards this conflict as if it started on October 7. Yeah, and then everything is judged in the region based on what happened on October 7. Whereas there is much more context to this conflict that has been going for, 70 years. And that's where they feel the Western narrative is trying to implement something that is out of context for them. Yeah, and it shapes whatever happens in Israel is completely different than how it reflects whatever happens in Palestine or Palestinian territory or Yemen or Lebanon or Syria. So that's why the feeling that there is double standards in how the Western media covers, in expressions, in the narrative, in the terminology used, and the definition of terrorism, definition of genocide, and all this is very, very floating, I would say. And that is shaping the region and shaping people's mindset towards Western media and the West.
But do you think that how things are looked at in the Global South, how you just mentioned, Is it unified or is it still fragmented? Is there a new identity shift happening?
It's still fragmented. But I think that there is unity in being impatient with how the West looks at it, because there's a sense that this is coming from privilege. It is an assertion of power. It is an assertion of having built your country. I don't mean you, I mean these countries, the West, having built their institutions, their economies, and are now lecturing to the rest of the world without allowing the rest of the world those opportunities or even those rights to intervene or to protect our own interests, right? So, for example, the West went to war in Iraq, bases now what is highly suspect evidence. Did the WMDs even exist? And that's a big question mark, right? But if, for example, one of our nations, let me not make it only about India, let me make it about any nation in the global South. If any of our nations said, we feel our security is jeopardized by so-and-so nation, and we have the right to respond, we would be immediately lectured to by the West saying, oh, you guys must sit at the dialogue table, you must talk, you have nuclear weapons. So do the Western nations. Western nations have nuclear weapons. Why are Western nations considered more responsible with nuclear weapons just because they're the West?
Oh, you could just now see it with the Iran Israel conflict, exactly about that, about two nuclear powers, Israel and the US, basically forbidding a third one from having
And my
one.
argument would be that if Iran doesn't have a nuclear program in the medium term, it's certainly going to develop one. Now it's going to be underground.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my personal sense of what's going to happen in the long run. May not happen immediately, but I think countries have realized that the only way that they actually get taken seriously is if they have this sort of shield of saying we're a nuclear power. And so it has the exact opposite impact.
Exactly.
And it's one of the reasons
the
that India
impunity, I
never
think, is
signed.
also-
India was never a signatory to the NPT.
NPT. Well, India has a special a deal with the US when it comes to its
The
nuclear
problem with
power.
this, if I may say, the problem with this is that it fuels into the narrative of conspiracy theories played by the West.
And
all the
people, and
time.
radicalized people, as you said.
Yes, and it gives them room to all autocratic regime to say that it's all conspiracies played by the West, aiming at regime change in the region.
Right.
Yeah, and that gives opportunity to autocrats to, bash on people who would criticize the government and their own governments for their own policies. Yeah, and that gives them room to maneuver and just, avoid any sort of punity by their own people.
But I want to maybe quickly touch with you specifically on Iran, because I think that war has maybe, I would like to imagine, was bringing some difficulty when it comes to how the Arab world sees it, in a sense that Iran is also not a very natural ally to many of the countries in the Arab world. Specifically in Lebanon, there's the Shia connection connected to Hezbollah that's also been very contested within the country, with getting a lot of criticism. So how this conflict, the war between Israel and Iran, was seen in Lebanon specifically, and how is it falling in the bigger picture on how the war in Gaza and Israel's aggression has been seen in the last 2 years?
Yeah, once again, it's on one side, because it really depends who you ask in Lebanon, right? There's a very big division on how do we think about Iran, and is it an ally or a state that has been manipulating a community, in the whole community in Lebanon, and is kind of invasive within the Lebanese society and politics. So but the question about this conflict, it kind of created a general consensus that Israel, a suspected nuclear state, nuclear power, is striking a country where there's practically no evidence that they have already nuclear power, or trying to lecture another state that is aiming towards a nuclear program. Yeah, and that create some sort of consensus that, well, we don't want to be caught in the middle. Well, others who were really harshly affected by the Iranian involvement in Lebanese politics, just saw it an opportunity for Iran to finally fight their own battles rather than using other forces in other countries across the Middle East to fight their own wars.
There was also the same sentiment in Afghanistan. People were like sad, but at the same time they said, yeah, it finally happens to them. They were fueling so much conflict in the past. Yeah. Now it's actually happening to them.
There was a sentiment among many Lebanese.
And at the end, I think they only strengthened the current government and the current regime in Iran. So, but you just said, Mohamad, I think that was really important. You just said that it helps people who believe in conspiracies, or maybe not, in ideas that Western countries go to other countries in the global south and they are trying to bring regime change. And I think this time they didn't hide it. I mean, they openly said that they want to have a regime change.
Some of the hope, definitely for the Israelis and the Americans, is that this will be some sort of a snowball that we don't know where it's going to lead. But they definitely welcome instability, let's put it that way. They did not fear any of that.
Yeah. But I just want to say that this does not diminish the role of Western involvement in policies and politics in the Middle East. I mean, they do have leverage, but that double standards fuel into the narrative in these countries of the conspiracy theories that is being used by anti-Western Westerners to build up their own narratives in the region.
And what do you think? How is this war or other wars that are currently happening, conflicts that are currently happening, being misrepresented also online when it comes to misinformation? I mean, you also look at this, right, during your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to comment on this because we work in an environment where access to information is very easy for everyone, but access to the truth and the right information, right source of information is rare. And then it takes a lot of work to verify information, to try to, because when information is so spread in such a quality and quantity, it takes much harder work to try and not only verify, but to try and spread the fact of what happened at one point. So it's we triple the work for journalists, especially in the region.
Mm-hmm. You also had a lot of experience, like Mohamad, being on the field, being on the ground. Do you see challenges today with the way new media works, the way the media landscape is, in the sense that maybe it doesn't matter anymore? Being on the ground used to be, the most important validation of the fact and what's happening. Do you think it still matters? I mean, is it is this, have we lost this battle as journalists?
It's a really important question. And for me personally, nothing matters more than being on the ground. I do think it informs you in a way that just no matter how many articles you read, it's just not the same. Yeah. Meeting people is always the best education. And you see it as a sort of eyewitness yourself, which is a very different experience. But I do take the point that that doesn't necessarily equal the most views. It doesn't necessarily equal the most impact, because we live in such a polarizing media environment that the more strident you are, the less nuanced you are, the more views you're going to get. And I think at that point, you have to make an assessment for yourself. How much down this road are you willing to go? And personally, I find it very, very, very sort of undesirable to, in a heightened situation, play into one of the extreme emotions, even though it would get you quick eyeballs like that. Yeah. We all know it. But that's the time to actually try and tone down. Some situations are heightened. We are going to be emotional. We are human. We are coming from our own context. So the idea that we're going to feel nothing about what we're seeing, that's not possible. But as much as possible to make it facts-driven, to make it fully complex in the way that it is, That said, I will say that there is A, a fog of war in any war. And B, new media, social media, call it what you will, does lead to a sort of viral traveling of misinformation or disinformation, so much so that even experienced hands like me, it's not that I have never got something wrong. And I think the best thing to do when you get it wrong is to say, sorry, we got that wrong. That was not corroborated. Maybe we should have made 10 more phone calls before we put that out. But be honest with your audience, because they will understand that you're in a very difficult situation, sometimes a very dangerous situation. Information is just coming from everywhere. Sometimes even somebody you believe to typically be a very reliable source will maybe either, have something that's not fully corroborated. So I guess it's a very difficult time to be a journalist, because the world is actually questioning, do we need journalists at all? There are people just with their phones who are, opining instead of reporting. But I think that there will always be a space to tell good stories. And maybe we have to change the way we tell our stories. Maybe it's a lesson for us to tell our stories better. But I do believe that space will exist, even with AI, even with influencers and all the rest of it.
Maybe it will become even more important.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
What's your
and I
take
think
on it,
that,
Mohamad?
this flow of information is really, really challenging. But I think the most efficient way to defy this is going to the ground and being on the ground. It's inevitable. Yeah, I don't think that this will be replaced by anything else but being on the ground, telling the truth story and giving enough context from the ground. Basically, that's this is how I see it. This is how I see the most efficient way to fight disinformation, misinformation, and the huge flow of information.
The problem is, though, that it takes time to give
And
context and to
traveled
give
by
the
then.
facts.
Yeah.
Are people patient enough? I mean, in the heat of the moment, people are just looking
And
for
there's a strong preference to
something.
narratives, to stories, facts sometimes.
It's very difficult. And the
is difficult.
easiest way to get more views or hits is actually to be slanted, one way or the other. And the toughest thing to do in this media environment is to say, you know what, even if the facts are inconvenient to what I personally believe, I'm still going to share them. My audience may not like it, but in the end, that's what I owe. That said, since we started a conversation about narratives, I think we have to acknowledge that there is no one singular truth. We are all shaped by our nations, our history, our cultures, our communities, our influences, right? I don't think we can pretend that there is one robotic truth out there in the world and we're going to be those truth tellers.
I want to maybe bring a point maybe in behalf of the Western perspective, which we like scrutinizing a lot, rightfully, but maybe
Especially in
sometimes
this podcast.
but maybe there's a power in that distance. And of course it has a stand, of course it has its bias, that sometimes we need in order to be fully critical. We as journalists need to admit that,
that would
working
be
on the
great, but
ground
I don't think they
in
have the
different
distance from
locations,
their own news.
Well, but we don't always have the freedom as journalists on the ground
Sure.
to be posing the critical questions, to be pointing on the challenges without jeopardizing ourselves and our teams and, the outside
It is
of you.
100% true. And I would agree with what you said. If I could look at Western media and say, you know what, they have a lot of distance from their own content. But
So they don't.
They don't. If you look at how the West covered WMDs, it's a classic thing, and Iraq. They went through
Weapons of mass destruction.
Yes,
Let's
sorry.
just say that.
Weapons of mass destruction. They went through what every journalist goes through. There were somebody writing that piece saying Iraq or Saddam Hussein has developed weapons of mass destruction, was briefed by a source that they trusted. Or they thought of it as a national security moment. They believed it. They trusted it. It turned out to be wrong later. The only point I'm trying to make, I'm not trying to sort of say that there's no great journalism in the West. Of course not. There's some excellent journalism in all parts of the world. And I think one should acknowledge that. All we're saying is that journalists are susceptible to the same pressures, the same mistakes, the same challenges everywhere. We work under enormous pressures, sometimes life-threatening pressures, sometimes, revenue pressures. sometimes social media pressures, right? The world around us is changing. We're still trying to be storytellers. And we're all kind of fighting the same battles. Just our perspectives may be different, but our battles are same.
But that's a fine line that separates, credible journalism
Correct.
from potential propaganda.
Yes.
Either whether it was done by mistake or on purpose. Yeah, but it's always important to give context. I mean, we do recognize that we cannot report freely from everywhere, but we can give context that we are not, at ease in reporting here. Or if one party, one group, one, is organizing a trip or is, giving a statement, it's very, very important to give context that if we're on the ground covering, maybe let me give you a real example. If it was a visit to, organized by Hezbollah, for instance, in Beirut to see their stronghold in the southern suburbs of Beirut, and just to demonstrate that Israel has been targeting civilian residences, and we know that it is organized by Hezbollah. We know that we sometimes cannot ask people the right questions that we need to ask, but it's important to cover the story and tell the audience, let them make up their mind, tell them that this is a trip organized by Hezbollah, but we're seeing this. I am seeing a residential building that has been hit, but also there's other buildings that has been hit, and it's important to say that if it's the case, well, we've been, guided towards one location. We cannot go to the other location because it's well organized by Hezbollah. So, and this goes for every conflict. I mean, if you are in a position where you cannot entirely verify the information or entirely report freely, you just need to give the context that I'm not really able to. I can only report on what I see, and this is the context of my reporting from that specific location.
And I think even in Western media, especially in Germany, I follow German media a lot, so I can speak about German media. When it comes to police statements, they're regarded as if they're like
Complete truth.
unbiased, complete truth.
Yeah.
And this is something that I have not observed in the countries in the global south, I think. I don't know what your experience is.
Well, I would draw a distinction between them. In our country, the police actually is questioned often, the military less so. And there's a reason for that. Usually the police is an internal, it relates to something internal. So it's, it could be a social issue or crime. And there's that sense that you can speak up, on it or question it. But when the military in a conflict, not otherwise, makes a statement, there's a sense of an external adversary. And I think, like, to borrow an example from Iran, people may have had problems in Iran with their government, but they closed ranks when they felt that the Americans or the Israelis were being unfair, right? So I think we have to understand that nations react differently and often bury their differences, arguments they may be having when they think that there is an outside sort of bullying or something unfair that's coming in at you from the outside. You suspend that disagreement for another time. It's not that you don't have that disagreement, you just suspend it for another time. And I think till we don't understand that, we will not appreciate why narratives are so different, why the same conflict will be reported in totally different language and nomenclatures, depending on which part of the world you're in.
No, but I think this brings back the conversation to the global standards of
Reporting.
basic journalism and reporting. I mean, if the same goes for the police in a democracy, in a theocracy, in an ethnocracy, it's elsewhere. The standard is you do not take a statement from one source, the police or a group or whoever is it, and then recycle it as a news. Or as a report.
Or you have to attribute.
You have to
say
attribute,
the
but in a
police said.
context.
The police said.
Yeah? And that's a global standard. It's not
Absolutely.
one
Attribution
set
is
of
a global standard.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Let's, before we finish, a quick question. What can the Western media learn from maybe your experiences and, outside this Western bubble? One tip, one advice.
I will just say, firstly, I study journalism in the West. So I've spent a lot of time in this conversation criticizing Western media. There's a lot to learn from. And before I say what they can learn, I'd like to say what I have learned from them. One is to speak more precisely. Indians have this habit. We're very talkative people. We use a lot of words to say a small thing. So I learned from the West how to discipline my words, how to use fewer words, how to use simpler words, not this tendency to, just be more precise. Brevity is certainly something that one has learned from the West. I think in being a broadcast journalist, a lot of ideas of production, of, graphics, all of that is also a technical skill that I think the West does very well. And I do think that some of these institutional rules of attribution, of multi-sourcing, these are all great lessons to learn. I think the one thing the Western media could learn from us is that we're not insular countries. We have a sense of our own and we have a sense of the world. But when you go to the West, sometimes there's very much the sense that they have only a sense of their own. And when they report on us, it's very much like foreign correspondence. Like there's such little granular understanding of us as people, of us as nations. And I feel like if I go to New York, or if I come to, Berlin, or I go to London, I have some sense. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I have some sense of these nations. But I don't feel the reverse. So I think just be less insular.
Yeah, I don't think that the Western media should learn from me. I think that the Western media has a set of global standards for journalism, and I think that they should learn from Western media. So basically, to stick to these standards. And when I'm doing my job the right way, then I'm just sticking to standards, journalistic standards, which is in code of conducts and in charters for international organizations and the Western media, of course. So if terms and expressions are seen in the industry as political terms or impartial, so let's avoid using them, like terms like terrorism, genocide. We just need to attribute, because that's our role. It's not to implement that this is a terrorist attack or it's a genocide that is happening. If we attribute, then that's fine enough. And
he's opening up a huge can at the end of our discussion.
I was just going to say that I think that will be, I don't know that that's possible, because that would come back to how we're shaped.
Well, it should be possible, because this is the standards. These are the standards that we should follow.
We don't all work for a global outfit. We're very shaped by, at least I make no pretense that I am reporting as an Indian. I'm not divorced from my identity as an Indian. That doesn't mean that you see, I would criticize my government if I needed to, any government, but I would still be defined by my identity as an Indian. So for me, I find this idea that words have no meaning and words can only be attributed. A lived reality for me as an Indian will influence the words I use.
No, I agree.
And that is true everywhere in the world.
But no, what I'm saying, we should not disagree on the definition of impartial.
But we do.
And the definition of unbiased.
But we do. Today, the two words that you've taken just now are the two most hotly debated. People have walked out of jobs or lost their jobs because of how these words are used. And,
I know.
It's not that.
But it shouldn't be the case. That's what I mean. It shouldn't be the case. I mean, there's a set of definition and there's metrics to, measure these definitions. So we shouldn't be really arguing about it. That's what I think.
Okay. We have to leave it there.
Do another debate on exactly this.
Exactly. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
joining
having
us
us.
today.
Unfortunately, we come to an end. But this war, like so many before it, it's not only been fought with weapons, but with words, images, and silence. And in that battle, power lies not just in what is said, but in who gets to say it and who gets hurt.
Today, we talked about competing narratives, political silence, and the growing distance between different parts of the world and the way they see the conflict. But maybe that distance is also an opportunity to listen differently and to tell the story more fully.
Our thanks to Barkha Dutt and Mohamad Chreyteh for their insights, their clarity, and for helping us look beyond the headlines.
And thank you, our viewers, for joining us for another episode of Global Eyes.
Global Eyes, a new take on security policy. by DW.